Okay.
So we read a little bit from Zach Norris's book, Defund Fear, and we're starting to explore some questions of who benefits from a fear-based public safety system. And a follow-up question could be, what are ways that society and systems push you into believing that you are one of the people that benefit from a fear-based public system?
I don't think anybody benefits personally. I don't understand. I don't know why. I don't know why anybody thinks they benefit from this kind of system.
Susan, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Could you speak up a little bit more?
Sure.
Thanks.
I said I don't think anyone benefits from the system that we have right now. I mean, or at least from what you're talking about. The part of the system that you're talking about. I just see problems for everybody. I mean, maybe somebody can make money off of it, but they're not happy. That's not going to make them happy.
Yeah, I don't think individuals are benefiting, but the prison system, the corporations, the property owners, they feel like they are benefiting from it because they can continue to gain, like you said, make money, earn money, and eliminate the competition, if you will. I wouldn't say it that way necessarily, but yeah.
Well, I think for the rest of us, it's easier. It's like the path of least resistance, it feels like, for a lot of people to live in that system that I'm comfortable with because it doesn't affect me directly. That as far as consciously or, in the present moment or whatever, it's, you got to think more deeply about it and see how it's hurting everyone,
No, there are plenty of people who feel it benefits them. The privilege, those in power, again, I wouldn't say it doesn't benefit people. Oh, there's plenty of people it benefits. And they're okay that it, disadvantages so many more.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I remember learning many years ago that we have enough money to house and feed and educate and clothe everybody in the world. We have such a huge military budget.
Yeah.
And I personally feel like we're all conscious in some way of what's going on, and it's stressful for all of us. There's a lot of crazy driving going on. Not crazy people, but even our dog. We paid $800 to find out there's nothing wrong with our dog except he's stressed.
Sorry.
And I mean, he's stressed because we're stressed.
Yeah.
And we're communicating that.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just a huge money-making industry.
Yeah, fear sells.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. From the free prison labor, Emmy's license plates, they do a huge amount for like a quarter. I don't know what it was. I heard this way back in the 80s.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's still true.
Well, and they switched over to for-profit prison system, which was a huge controversy, if that made any sense at all.
Right.
And also is where the mentally ill and people that are supposed to be cared for by the system that was dismantled by Reagan and disbanded all of the institutional systems that house, like Anoka and Faribault, and so many were disbanded, and they dumped them on the streets. They literally dumped them in their hospital robes and slippers on the streets. Some people, they had, I just saw this on TV.
And I have to go to the literacy point of view here, because there's a huge percentage of people in prison who can't read,
right?
For lots of reasons. So that seems like a fault of the education system right there. Mm-hmm. Who knows what doors would have opened for them their needs have been met. So,
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that, like you said, the for-profit prison system benefits, police departments benefit. I mean, early COVID, right? Like nurses are having to wear garbage bags as personal protective equipment, whereas police departments are getting full riot gear, full ammunition to protect themselves from the fearful, peaceful protesters. And so it's very profitable for certain industries. The media even reporting on individual crimes instead of systemic harms, right? Like how often are we hearing about individual shooters instead of a complete lack of any kind of gun control, right? And so it's not that the individual incidents aren't important, but that they cannot be taken out of the context. I don't know if anyone saw The Onion after the Texas shooting. Every time there's a shooting, they post the same headline and the same article, and they just change like the location and the date and then a couple of the fake names. And the headline is always, "No way to prevent this, says person in only country where this regularly happens." And so after the Texas shooting, they changed every single article on their entire webpage, all 21 or 22 of them that they had posted in the last couple of years with every single shooting. Just to sort of be like, we can be really sad about this particular thing, and we need to look at how, you know, we are the media coverage, all of this stuff, maybe this person had mental health, maybe whatever, like we are baited into thinking that these are isolated incidents. Even things like, oh, Derek Chauvin was one bad apple, instead of police departments were designed as slave catching apparatuses and still operate that way to control the bodies of Black people that we have been told to think are fearful, right? So yeah,
And the solution is binary. It just makes me so angry when I hear the politicians on the news saying, well, gun control will not solve this problem. Like,
It'll help.
it doesn't have to be either or.
You
There's
can
so
have better mental health
binary in their thinking.
and, yeah.
Yeah, I really relate to what you said, Stephanie, about the media benefiting. You know, here in Chicago, of course, we have, I mean, it's rampant in terms of, you know, the shootings, but they don't necessarily cover, you know, the reasons why. Education was mentioned, which I think is a big one. You know, education, poverty, and that kind of thing. It's not covered. It's not, you know, newsy. I guess it doesn't get eyeballs on your site or sell papers and so forth. So yeah, there are lots of institutions that benefit from this fear that you don't necessarily think of right away, but they do, including politicians, for sure.
Now, I was taking the fear thing, not just necessarily in the justice system, but if you look at what Putin is doing, it's all fear-based, saying that, hey, these people in Ukraine are being suppressed from the evil West. And selling, even though the people there are going, no, we're not. That's the publicity and the story being told to the Russian people. To, again, fear to help control that. Trump. And, you know, the whole election was all fear, you know, driven with fear of election fraud.
so one interesting thing that Zach Norris points out is that most of the nation has gotten much safer in the last 40 years. Statistically, crime has dropped. But despite the abrupt drop in crime, things seem much less safe now. he's talking about Oakland, where he grew up and lives with his family. But I think it's true all across the country. We have this anxiety machine, largely driven by the media, that things are less safe than they used to be, even though we have more prisons and more policing than we've ever had. So I think it's just really interesting to really step back and consider, like, not just these things are wrong, but to say, like, what is there to gain from this system? Because the system must be in somebody's self-interest for it to be perpetuated, right? And so it's like, in what ways, who benefits from that? Because I don't think that it's our mental health. I don't think that it's our communities. It isn't our safety. But if we can't see how, if we're unwilling to, like, really frankly look at who is benefiting from that system, it's going to be really hard to change.
One thing I've noticed in the news lately is there are a lot of stories that seem to come from a pro law enforcement attitude, stories that prosecutors are not charging strong enough because these certain individuals, you know, get probation and then they commit another crime, and so they're trying. I think some prosecutors are trying to see that sending someone to prison isn't always the best answer, and they do something about that, and they give them probation if you go to this program or whatever. And then if something bad happens, then of course, then it's big news that they didn't give them the maximum or didn't give them the average jail time or whatever, you know. And it's the reporting, even on the mainstream local channels or whatever, seems to be from the angle that that was a bad decision by this prosecutor, and they don't even have any nuance or context about what maybe they're trying to do, or, you know, it's still based on this, oh, we gotta clean out the fearsome elements in our community or whatever, you know.
And Richard Norris Derek Norris points out, he says, because trauma is as much of a chief cause of violence as the result of violence, our current fear-based system paradoxically generates more harm than it prevents in never-ending cycles of trauma. So another thing that Norris does is uses stories throughout the book to show that crimes pose less of a threat to most of us than do systemic harm. We are much more likely, even as privileged individuals, to face the systemic harm of healthcare. How do you pay for a relative that needs end-of-life care, or yourself coming down with cancer or something? So it's just like, we in this us versus them mentality, and there are all kinds of ways that we can have privilege of class and race and wealth, which is different than class, that these systemic harms are marketed to us as not our problem, because it's probably not going to affect us in that same way, and that we need to be afraid of the bad people who are coming to commit crimes. So what are, without getting into like the oppression Olympics or a victimized mindset, because I don't think that that's generative, what are some of the systemic harms that are on your doorstep, or you do see interacting with your life? Because again, this isn't just a problem for other people that we magnanimous white identifying people get to solve or care about, but this is, our liberation's absolutely tied up in this. So can you think of, without having to be like too self-disclosing in a way that you don't feel comfortable, ways that these systemic harms, show up for, make a difference in your life personally? I can say for myself, I am coming to you from my tiny house in Grand Marais, which is so fun, and why my allergies are so rotten because everything different is in bloom here. But there's an absolute housing crisis because of the distribution of wealth. The people that work here can't afford to live here because there is just so much income disparity, and people earning city salaries working in the woods, and tourists coming up here and wanting to go to restaurants and wanting to stay at hotels, but then all the short-term rentals, all that kind of thing, and then like the retired and remote workers buying up land that then the people who are making all those hotel beds and serving them all their food can't possibly find a place to live. So I have all kinds of privilege, and I'm very fortunate to have wound up with the situation that I'm in. But I definitely had a lot fewer choices, and more than most, but a lot fewer choices in terms of finding housing. And so that's one of the ways that an uneven distribution of wealth, inequitable wages, has definitely impacted the community in which I live and impacted my life. I'm also a healthcare provider, and if I choose to accept insurance, the insurance companies become my boss instead of my patients, and they tell me what care I can and cannot give, and set the prices for me of what I can get paid. They decide that. And then if I want to charge my patients more, that's on my patients. But it's really wild how much that system of healthcare and spotty insurance and inconsistencies becomes, for a lot of folks, the primary driver behind the care that they can get instead of what their bodies need and what I'm able to provide.
Okay, I'm kind of going to go on a non sequitur, but it to me I'm talking about harm that is to someone I care very much about, who through the legal system ended up with a felony on his record. He can't get a job. He gets a job. They like him. He's an excellent worker. He's a very amiable person. He can't. 2 days later, the background check comes out. He's fired. He can't find a place to live either because people will not rent to people with felonies. They charge him for his jail time. Rent for the jail. Kick him when he's down, kick him when he's down. And you wonder why people are out there on the street trying to go for illegal ways of making money and maybe fighting with one another and ending up with shootings. And of course, I think a lot of it, there's a systemic racism within that whole picture. In this case, my friend is not a person of color. Can't get back on his feet. Just can't get back on his feet. Kick him when he's down, and that is, I've just recently learned this, and it's just killing me. So harm done.
Yeah, wow.
Yes, and to try to get that expunged from your record takes a huge amount of work.
Okay.
And money.
Right.
Okay, here's a couple problems with that. One is that they can expunge, but you have to wait like 10 years. And you can get pro bono, but if you don't have any money, you're not going to be able to hire a lawyer. And that's what happened kind of in the first place, is ending up in this situation because he had a public defender and they just didn't go to the bother that, defending him. And so, but yeah, so like I said, the expunge thing is fine but 10 years, you don't have a job and you don't have a place to pay or place to stay.
Well, that brings to mind just the scene that why people are asking for handouts on street corners. They have nowhere to go, no other way to live, and we happen to come by a pair, and the look of stress on their face was just sad, so sad. Because it was getting towards the end of the time they could be out there. And they knew, what are they gonna do? Go under a bridge? So it's showing, it's affecting every one of us every time we go by someone with a sign. And families, a mother and father and kids.
I wonder if there are other ways that this kind of systems of harm, systemic harm, feels personal for us. Another example that comes to mind for me is one that we've already addressed, actually, with access to healthcare and reproductive choices. As a woman of childbearing years, and as a woman who has a lot of friends of childbearing years and a health care provider, that is a way that this kind of systematized, structural opposite of care, right, really lands like squarely on my doorstep and on the doorstep of my community. Compounded with, if forced birth becomes the law of many states, then what happens to the welfare of those children? Is there affordable pre-K? Is there time off? Is there even things like predictable scheduling for hourly workers so that they can, you know, get childcare taken care of and all that kind of thing, you know? So can they feed these children that they're being forced to birth? So that is another way that this doesn't feel like it's happening to other people that I watch, but could also, and I'm not saying this isn't binary, right? It's not that, oh, I have privilege, so none of these things affect me, or these things affect me, so I don't have privilege. I absolutely do. And even on top of all of that, these are the ways that this kind of system of harm being the opposite of care, is very personal. Other thoughts, or I do have one more point that I want to get to.
Well, I don't know if this counts as systemic or not, but I think it does. And it affects everybody to one extent or another. And that is, I mean, there's the inflation, which of course has so many, many, many reasons why it's so bad right now. But one of the reasons is because there are a lot of companies who are making a lot of money that they don't need to be making. The container ships, there's like 10 companies that control the whole worldwide system, and they made 3 times more profit in 2021 than they did the year before. So there's something wrong with that. So it's monopolies, and there's a lot of United States companies that have done the same type of thing, that they have increased their profits off the backs of the people of, in this case, the United States. So
and that hurts the people in need more than it does anybody else.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it affects everybody, but everything bad affects the people more in need than anybody else. I mean, it's just like Alice said, it just, kick them while they're down.
So the last thing I want to talk about is Norris brings up Abraham Maslow, the psychologist. And so I'm just going to read a short passage here. Psychologist Abraham Maslow put safety near the bottom of his famous pyramid of needs, right after having enough food and warmth and sleep to literally stay alive. All the unglamorous foundational stuff humans require before getting to the cool advanced stuff like accomplishments, prestige, or enlightenment. In other words, safety is a mere prerequisite for the stuff we really long for and aspire to, stuff like having amazing relationships and doing meaningful work in the world. And pardon my allergies. I want to complicate that idea a little bit. Some psychologists now are actually inverting that pyramid and thinking that having spirituality meaningful connections are what drive us to get these safety things to keep us alive. And especially in this context, I was thinking things like achievements, accomplishments, relationships are ways that we try to build safety. If I have enough education, maybe then I will be safe and have a safe place to eat. Being a doctor and having generational family in this town means that I have more housing choices, right? And so it's the lower parts of the pyramid that are our way to get to safety and getting our basic needs met. And so I'm curious about, I wonder what things in your life you're able to identify as building blocks or stepping stones to a sense of safety and having our basic needs met. So education, family support, memberships in certain clubs or things like that. Like, I just wonder if you're able to, I invite you to reflect on the things that you have sought after in the traditional sense because you have safety, but in the modern sense, the accolades, etc., that give you a sense of safety in the world. And just to reflect on that. So don't feel like you have to answer right away, but I'm curious to get those wheels spinning.
Well, I think it's interesting, safety, the word safety and where you're safe can be pretty complicated, which I'm discovering as we're going through some therapy, with family therapy, trying to deal with some of our issues. I had discovered that I thought I was providing a safe place, but actually some of my behavior was causing my children to not feel safe. So it's pretty complicated. I mean, this is all very, very complicated. We recently read the book called What Happened to You, which is about trauma, unresolved trauma, and how trauma will go through generations. And there are ways. We're not dealing with trauma very well right now. We're not providing the actual care, the actual things that people need to get better. So we're lucky we have money and we found some really good therapists, but it's still it's a long trip that we're on, and some really surprising things to me about my behavior and my background and how it's affected me. And I mean, I think there are people that are working on some wonderful things. Like this book features this doctor who, there was a little boy, there's a lot of little children he deals with who are traumatized. Either their parents did, abandon them, or they're in foster care, all these different things, and they turn out to be like little, like just like time bombs kind of thing. So he has a way, he has discovered that connecting these children with people is what makes a difference in their life. Before they don't have the connections that are important for them, and then once they do, all of a sudden they're not delinquent. So anyway,
I know from my experience, there's two communities, this one and my singing comrades. Make me feel incredibly psychologically safe, I guess is the word, comfortable to be in my own skin and not anxious or tentative for dealing with people or whatever. It's just been a resource for me, it's not necessarily personal physical safety, but just personal, spiritual, and psychological safety.
I would also argue that personal physical safety is included in there because when I was working in a clinic in South Minneapolis, as a patient advocate, one of the questions we would ask is like, do you have a safety net? Do you feel like you have a social safety net? And one of the ways to ask that is like, one of the ways we would get into that is if your car broke down on the side of the road, do you have somebody that you could call to come help you out? And so There are some people for whom that answer is no. And it sounds like, Chuck, you're like, I have people I could call here, I have singing friends, like, and so this is a way that that pyramid is inverted by having those social communities, deep relationships. Your physical safety is much more secure.
Right.
Just to make those connections. Yeah.
But also, I get the feeling with Chuck that he has safety in terms of people recognizing his value, his what you were talking about, accomplishments. There are people that appreciate that, and so it makes him feel better, and knowing that they're always going to feel that way about him.
Yeah.
And maybe a sense of purpose is a part of that too.
Right.
That meaningful activity. Can you, were you gonna say something earlier?
Oh, yes. People who are out there fighting for our rights and who have a voice, and our leaders in our country, and just have the bravery to do what needs to be done. I think that makes me feel really good.
I agree, especially after watching the hearing.
Yeah.
It's just so wonderful to see all these great people that are doing their job, and to feel good about being in government, and just, it made me feel.
And they want to keep it,
Yeah.
to keep our democracy.
I forgot to pass the basket for the social justice donations for Planned Parenthood or the Ukraine effort, so I'll do that now while we get to maybe another comment or two, or.
Yeah, if there are any comments or any questions that this conversation has brought up for you.
Still just trying to go through like process. What makes me feel safe? And just knowing that, well, yeah, family and friends around me, but it's like, I know I won't go hungry. I've got a place to stay. Well, I'm at a point where I don't want work, but I still have work.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I'm becoming more and more aware of the privilege that I have. And looking at the path of how I've been able to get to where I am today was probably far easier than what many others have had to do or to get to where they want to be.
Yeah, I've often thought of the possibilities that I assumed I was hired for this job, for instance, based on just my merit, but maybe there was somebody more qualified who was a person of color or had a record or whatever, that was passed over, and I never even knew about that, or buying our house, or whatever. There's privilege that we go through, and we don't even see how the path has been smoothed for us,
Yeah, I've always looked at, hey, my dad was education of a 9th grade, and he made and built up his own business and stuff, and then I find out, oh, he was offered educational choices from the military, being a white male, that other people were not. And then I start seeing all that part of it. And it's like, okay, so he still had the privilege of the white male, even though he didn't have education.
Those sound like some good realizations, insights. One funny thing that I've noticed about living up here, so I'm living on my family's land at the cabin, and my parents have one of those video doorbell monitor or door monitor things. I don't know the right word. And it like takes a picture of every person that comes to the door. And I was like, when has anyone ever shown up here? I never lock my car. This is the safest place in the world. To the point where like, you have a key under the deck. And I was like, you have a key under the deck, but then you put up like a video monitoring system? Like, this is just so bizarre to me. But as I sit here and think about it, I'm like, this is that fear, security business that we're just like all taught to be paranoid of what might be lurking at literally at our front door, right? And there's a backup key in the sauna if anybody wants to come on down. To the point where we were building this house 20 years ago, and my mom said to her cousin, like, oh, you should come check it out sometime. He's like, oh yeah, I was in there last week. I used the key under the deck. And she was like, what do you think? Like, everyone knows where everyone's key is because it's all in the same place. It's under the stairs, under the deck. But this is like
being recorded, you know.
Listen, I bet
I might have to edit.
You check under the potted plant, you check, like, everyone has a key hidden outside their house. And we all just sort of have this social contract of like, but we're not going to use it. But it wouldn't be that hard to find if I went looking for it. But so just the contrast of everyone having a key under their deck and a video monitor on their front door is just really comical to me.
But there's another really comical dichotomy here, right along County Road 42 in Savage. The Abdullah chocolate shop was bought out by the gun shop.
Oh,
no.
They expanded, removed one of the great pleasures in life, and moved in guns. It's worthy of a national cartoon.
Yeah.
it's not so comical.
No, it's not. I hate to bring this up at 11:26, but I'm gonna anyway, sorry. So for most of my life, I have thought that education is the way, is the gateway, is the doorway to try to fix some of the social problems that we have and to give opportunities for people of color or the disadvantaged in some way. And I still believe that to a certain effect, level. But at the same time, I am, similar to what Jim was saying, seeing so many more ways that the system, it is an educational system, and that it is privileging some people and disadvantaging other people to a huge extent, and grading is one of them. But then at the same time, with all of these shootings, I used to think that education, my school was a safe place, and I don't know that I feel that way and in the same way. So that's a complicated kind of thought process that I have, but and I don't have a solution for it at all, but those are things that are swirling around inside my brain.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to our earlier conversation of like, nothing is untouched by this. Even those things that we thought were bastions of safety might actually still be part of the systems of harm.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to see that we participate in these systems too, in all kinds of ways. So I'm going to invite, I know Chuck has a closing song for us, and then we can hang out and mingle, and y'all can mingle in person, and we can still mingle online and carry on. I hope this is not the end of these conversations for any of us, but I do want to honor our time. So